Between 1881 and 1894, the Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology sent teams of archaeologists across the United States to excavate and document the ancient burial mounds that covered the American Midwest and Southeast. These mounds, thousands of them, stretching from Ohio to Florida, from New York to Wisconsin, had puzzled European settlers since the first colonial arrivals. Nobody knew with certainty who had built them or when or why. The Smithsonian was going to find out. What their field teams documented in those years was placed into official reports, submitted to the government, and cataloged by the institution. Some of those reports described skeletal remains of unusual size, not extraordinary by a few inches, but significantly larger than the skeletal averages recorded for Native American populations of the same period. Some reports described remains measuring 7 feet. Some described remains measuring over 7.5 feet. A small number of reports documented remains that investigators in the field described as approaching 8 feet in length. Hundreds of documented discoveries across 34 states in official government records, and then in a 1968 Freedom of Information Act request, researchers asked the Smithsonian directly, "Where are these remains?" The answer the Smithsonian provided has never been fully explained. The burial mounds of North America are among the most significant and least understood archaeological features on the continent. The largest, Cahokia Mounds in Illinois, covers more than 2,000 acres and was built by a civilization that, at its peak around 1100 AD, had a population larger than contemporary London. The mound-building cultures stretched across 1,500 years of American prehistory. They buried their dead, their artifacts, and in some cases, their most significant individuals beneath these earthen structures. When European American settlers began moving into the Ohio Valley and the Mississippi River Basin in the late 1700s and early 1800s, they encountered these mounds everywhere. Many were destroyed for farmland, many were excavated by amateur collectors seeking artifacts, and many were investigated by the emerging discipline of American archaeology, including, beginning in 1881, by the Smithsonian Institution itself, which created the Bureau of Ethnology specifically to document what remained of America's pre-colonial archaeological record before it was lost entirely. The Bureau of Ethnology's field reports from this period are public record. They exist in the Smithsonian's own archives, and within those reports, specifically in the work of archaeologist Cyrus Thomas, who led the Mound Survey project, there are consistent references to skeletal remains described as significantly larger than average. The 1894 report submitted to Congress by the Bureau of Ethnology references multiple sites where investigators documented oversized remains. Individual reports from field teams in Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, and Tennessee described skeletal measurements that exceeded 7 feet. In some cases, investigators noted unusual bone density. In other cases, they noted the presence of double rows of teeth, a physiological anomaly documented in a small percentage of the human population, but noted with notable frequency across multiple Smithsonian field reports from this era. These were not fringe publications. These were official government documents submitted to Congress and archived by the institution responsible for the national collection of American archaeological materials. The descriptions were made by trained investigators, recorded in standardized field notation, and cross-referenced across multiple sites. The Smithsonian's field reports were not the only documentation. Between 1850 and 1910, hundreds of American newspapers published accounts of large skeletal discoveries from mound excavations across the country. The New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and dozens of regional papers reported on specific excavations with specific measurements. These are not anecdotal accounts. They are published news reports from the era of American westward expansion, when mound excavations were public events that drew community attention. Researchers compiling these newspaper accounts have identified over 1,000 individual reports of unusually large skeletal remains from mound sites across 34 states. The consistency of the reports across different investigators, different states, different decades, suggests a pattern rather than isolated exaggeration. Something was being found in these mounds. Something was being documented. And then, over the course of the 20th century, something happened to those remains. In 1968, a researcher submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the Smithsonian Institution, asking specifically about the disposition of skeletal remains described in the Bureau of Ethnology's 19th century field reports as significantly larger than average. The response was illuminating and troubling in equal measure. The Smithsonian acknowledged that remains cataloged during the mound survey period had been processed through the institution over the decades following collection. It acknowledged that a significant portion of the skeletal material from this era had been destroyed. The official explanation cited deterioration, storage limitations, and the standard archival practice of the period, which involved disposing of materials that could not be adequately preserved given the technology available at the time. Destroyed, not lost, not transferred, not placed in another institution, destroyed. The skeletal remains documented across hundreds of official field reports, cross-referenced in thousands of contemporary newspaper accounts, collected by government-funded investigators over 13 years of systematic excavation, had been destroyed by the institution responsible for preserving America's archaeological record. The Smithsonian's position has remained consistent. The remains were destroyed as part of standard collections management practice. The institution lacked the storage capacity and preservation technology to maintain all materials collected during the survey period. Decisions about what to retain and what to dispose of were made by curators applying the standards of their era. There was no conspiracy. There was no suppression. There was institutional management of a material collection that exceeded available resources. Critics of this explanation point to one specific problem. The Smithsonian retained thousands of other skeletal remains from the same survey period, remains that were average in size, average in morphology, consistent with the established archaeological record of Native American populations. The remains that were disproportionately affected by the disposal process were precisely the ones that had been described as anomalous. The average remains survived, the unusual remains did not. Whether that pattern represents deliberate suppression or statistical coincidence has never been definitively established. Modern physical anthropology does document genetic conditions that can produce skeletal development significantly above average height. Gigantism, caused by excess growth hormone production, can result in adult heights well above 7 feet. Marfan syndrome and other skeletal dysplasias can produce unusually large skeletal frames. These conditions are rare but documented, and their presence in pre-colonial American populations is not scientifically impossible. What the science cannot currently evaluate is the specific remains described in the Smithsonian's field reports, because those remains no longer exist in verifiable form. The documentation survives. The physical evidence does not. And in forensic terms, documentation without a verifiable physical specimen is exactly the same problem the Ron Wyatt case presents from a different direction. A claim supported by records, but not by recoverable physical evidence. The Smithsonian Institution was created by an act of Congress in 1846 for the express purpose of preserving knowledge. Its mandate is the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. It is the largest museum and research complex in the world. It holds over 150 million objects and specimens in its collections. It destroyed the physical evidence for one of the most extensively documented archaeological patterns in American history. The field reports still exist. The newspaper accounts still exist. The 1894 congressional report still exists. The FOIA response acknowledging destruction still exists. The remains do not. Every mechanism that should have preserved this evidence was in place. The institution existed. The mandate existed. The documentation existed. The physical specimens existed until they did not. Whether the destruction was negligence, policy, or something more deliberate is a question the available record cannot definitively answer. What the record does answer is this: something was found in the burial mounds of North America, found repeatedly, documented officially, reported publicly, and the physical evidence for what it was no longer exists. And the institution that destroyed it is the same institution responsible for preserving it.